With the new SBS that came out, we finally got a sliver of new information on the red hair pirates, so I thought it was the perfect time to finally talk about them. Also, by the way, if you missed my breakdown video on the new SBS, be sure to check it out right here. In that new SBS, we got the names of some of the red hair pirates, found out who the officers were, and also might have gotten confirmation that Shanks is a swordsman. So in this video, we're gonna break down the importance of that new information and talk about why the red hair pirates are so powerful. But first off, if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join our King Pirates crew. And also, if you have a good time watching this video, please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. I would really appreciate it. But yeah, for this video, I kind of want to just go through the red hair pirates from the top to the bottom and break down what makes them so powerful. So starting off with the boss man at the top, the man that inspired the future pirate king, and that is Shanks. See, Shanks is a bit of an anomaly because I love his character, but we've barely seen him in the story. And a lot of people agree with me on this because this man has never fallen out of the top 15 in the popularity polls. So clearly a lot of people love Shanks, but where things escalate to another level is when we talk about how strong he is. Because even though we haven't seen much of Shanks in the story, when he is on screen, there's some features about him that really stand out. First off, he's an incredibly simple guy, a guy that just likes to travel and adventure. He likes to just party it up and kick it back with the boys and drink some beer. Probably also knocked up the bartender while he was at it. And overall, he's just a very chill dude that doesn't let little things get to him. And of course, the prime example of that was how chill he was against the mountain bandits, where even though they were spilling drinks on him and taunting him, he just didn't care and laughed about it because they weren't worth his time. But on the other hand, to kind of contrast that personality, he also has another side to him that does not mess around when shit goes down. So even though he didn't give a damn about the mountain bandits when they were taunting him and making fun of him, when they actually kidnapped Luffy and put someone he cared about in danger, he did not mess around anymore. So Shanks, from the moment we met him, had this really likable personality where he was a ruthless pirate that would kill people, but he also still was a chill guy that you could hang out with. But then of course things became very different when we found out he was a Yonko, because this meant he was one of the strongest pirates that stood at the pinnacle of the pirate world. But despite holding such a high position of power, we still knew him as that kind pirate that we met back in chapter 1. And overall, this type of person is just very easy to like because they're powerful, strong, and reliable, but also very relatable. If I had to compare him to somebody, he's kind of like Barack Obama. Like, politics aside, even in regards to Shanks, because we don't know what he's up to behind the scenes, but I feel like the public perception of Obama was always that despite being the president of the United States, he was a person that you could hang out with. He was just a regular guy. So I think Shanks gives off that same vibe, which is why a lot of people like him. And then you add in all the mystery surrounding him to kind of build up some hype and speculation. And then there's a cherry on top of the feats that Shanks has had in the story. Clashing with Whitebeard, stopping Kaido from going to Marineford, legendary duels with Mihawk. It's impossible not to get hype about Shanks' power when Oda is sprinkling all these feats in there, and he's such a likable guy. So I do think the hype and speculation around Shanks' power is warranted because Oda has built him up this way. But to really break down what makes Shanks so powerful, I'm gonna go through everything we know about him and really try to analyze everything. First off, right off the bat, let's just establish one thing: there's no way Shanks is weak. There's all the feats that I mentioned before, plus the fact that he's a Yonko. At the very least, he's one of the strongest in the world. So really the question when it comes to Shanks is where he stands at the top. Now, I'm not gonna rank him in this video, especially because next Friday we're doing a top 30 power scaling stream. It's probably gonna take place at 10 AM EST, so make sure you're subscribed and tune into that. But let's get into this breakdown and talk about some of the arguments for and against Shanks' power. Starting with the beginning of Shanks' life, the first major thing we have to point out is that he grew up with the Roger Pirates. Now, of course, the Roger Pirates are a legendary pirate crew with many strong people, so the fact that Shanks was an apprentice on that ship and went through so many experiences with that crew feels like it should be a pretty big deal, but at the same time, we do have the example of Buggy. Buggy, just like Shanks, was also an apprentice on the Roger Pirates and went through the same experiences, and even though he's grifted his way to becoming a warlord and has built a religion around him, when it comes to power, he's just not very strong at all. So although Shanks probably gained a lot of valuable experience on the Roger Pirates, like fighting in the Ed War, I don't think it's as meaningful when it comes to his power because we have the example of Buggy. The one thing I do find meaningful from his time on the Roger Pirates, though, is the fact that Roger gave him his straw hat. Roger gave Shanks his straw hat very early on, and even though we don't know the reason he did that, because we know that Shanks gave the straw hat to Luffy because he believed in his potential, I feel like Roger probably did the same thing for the same reason. So I think that's really the first point of evidence of Shanks' power, in that Roger recognized him and saw his potential. But then we get to the next part of his life after the Roger Pirates disbanded, and this is the part we don't really have a lot of information on. Everything's kind of scattered. First off, 22 years ago, he begins to form his own crew and he recruits Yasopp, which although that doesn't really tell much about how strong he is, I think the fact that he was able to recruit so many strong people, who we'll talk about in a little bit, does back up the idea that he's a strong leader himself. But yeah, besides forming the Red Hair Pirates, he also at some point got into a duel with Blackbeard and got that scar. And this I feel like is one of the only stains on Shanks' resume, because as far as we know, Blackbeard back then wasn't nearly as strong as he is now. And even right now, Blackbeard is seen as one of the weaker Yonkos, even though he has 2 devil fruits. And back then he had neither of those 2 devil fruits, so the fact that he was able to scar Shanks makes it very interesting. Like logically, it just doesn't make that much sense, which is why it's one of the things I'm most excited to find out about. But I feel like that incident more so highlights Blackbeard's potential of how strong he is, as opposed to actually hurting Shanks' reputation. Besides that, we also know that Shanks had legendary duels with Mihawk, and we'll get into the swordsman debate in a second, but at the very least, we gotta recognize that Mihawk is Zoro's endgame opponent. So whether or not you think Mihawk or Shanks is stronger, both of them are top tier fighters. But as for who's stronger between the two, the first thing I actually want to talk about is who actually won the duel between them. Now logically, the answer is Mihawk because he is now the world's strongest swordsman, and I feel like that's something that's pretty hard to argue against because it's just a fact. Like you could bring up a bunch of different speculations that could end up coming true, but the fact still is right now Mihawk is the world's strongest swordsman. And this is where we're gonna get into this swordsman debate. I'm gonna try to keep this quick because I've talked about it many times by now. There's a few different arguments that people like to make here. First off, you have a group of people that just say that Shanks is not a swordsman, which caused a lot of people to jump on a picture that was dropped to the newest SBS, where we had this group picture of swordsman and Shanks was in there. Now it is important to note that that was fan art by somebody else and not by Oda, but Oda did approve of the picture enough to put it into the SBS. And honestly, I think until we see otherwise, Shanks is a swordsman. Every single battle he's taken part of, he has used a sword. We haven't seen him use a devil fruit, and we don't have any hints that he has one. So I think the argument that he isn't a swordsman just doesn't hold up that strong. But then there's a second argument that a lot of people have where they say that Mihawk is the better swordsman, but Shanks has better haki. And this one is another one that never made any sense to me, because haki is not a combat style and not like some superpower. It's a power that literally everybody has. It's an innate ability, and it's something that is used to complement every single combat style. So in my opinion, haki is just an innate attribute like speed, power, and agility. You use it with every single combat style and it's not in its own category. So I think if you give into the logic that Mihawk is a better swordsman right now than Shanks, then simply Mihawk is stronger than Shanks. But at the same time, I'm still not willing to say confidently that Mihawk is stronger than Shanks. And that's because we just don't have enough information. Right now, Mihawk does hold the title of the world's strongest swordsman, but we don't know how strong he's gotten over the time or Shanks. During that break when they stopped fighting, Shanks did become a Yonko, and we still don't know how their last duel really went. So even though I feel like all these gymnastics to try to get around the fact that Shanks is not a swordsman are ridiculous, I'm still not confident enough to say Mihawk is stronger than Shanks. I think what I'm doing is just getting everybody pissed off at me. I'm not on anybody's side. But yeah, with that said, the next thing we really know about Shanks' life is when he meets Luffy, and during that interaction he doesn't really show off any power, but we did see him use Conqueror's Haki against the Sea King. Now although that's not a major feat in the story, it is Oda emphasizing Shanks' Conqueror's Haki, so I think that's something to take note of in regards to his power. But after that, 6 years later, he goes on to become a Yonko, showing that he and the Red Hair Pirates became even stronger. And then we get to the present day story where we get to the really big feats. First off, he has that clash with Whitebeard, which of course split the skies. That interaction once again emphasized a lot on Shanks' Conqueror's Haki, so I think at this point it's very clear that Oda's really pushing Shanks' Conqueror's Haki. But as far as his clash with Whitebeard, although that was really cool, looking back at that now, it's not really that impressive or unexpected. It's impressive if you compare it to like a regular person, but we already established that Shanks is top tier. And while Whitebeard was still very strong back then and known as the world's strongest man, I feel like with how sick he was back then, we should expect Shanks to be able to do something like that. It's not like Shanks went head to head with prime Whitebeard, but I guess it does establish that Shanks is a top tier fighter in the One Piece world if somebody doubted that. After that though, I think we have a much bigger feat for Shanks, which is unfortunately off screen, and that of course was Shanks stopping Kaido from showing up to Marineford. Now this one I think is a lot more impressive because Shanks versus Whitebeard, it almost felt like a flex. It's like the Roger Pirates versus the Whitebeard Pirates during the Oden flashback, where they kind of went all out but none of them really had any intent to harm. But as we've seen with Kaido, that man does not give a damn, he will slaughter you. So the fact that Shanks forcibly stopped Kaido in his tracks, I think that's probably the most impressive feat for Shanks in the story. And if you wanted to make the argument that Shanks is the strongest in the world, that's what you would point to. Unfortunately though, it's classic One Piece in that it was off screen. So once again, we don't really have enough concrete information to judge by. It's possible that Shanks is just stronger than Kaido and forced him back, or maybe the Beast Pirates just got outworked by the rest of the Red Hair Pirates. I believe in a recent Viver card, we only found out that King went with Kaido to Marineford, but there was no mention about Queen or Jack. Meanwhile, Shanks Shanks took all his officers, so it could have been just a manpower thing, but I do think this feat is probably the most impressive one for Shanks. And then finally, we have him showing up to Marineford and stopping the war, which once again, he doesn't really fight anybody besides stopping a Kainu. But I think the fact that nobody stepped up to fight him is very telling of how strong he is. Like the Marines, the Blackbeard pirates, nobody wanted that smoke. But yeah, besides that, the only other thing we really have is him interacting with the Gorosei, which I guess goes to show like everybody kind of respects him in a way. But overall, that's really all the information that we have on Shanks. I think when it comes down to it, it's very clear that at bare minimum, Shanks is still a top tier fighter. He's also been shown as a respected person and a great leader. Conqueror's Haki has also been strongly emphasized with him, so that's definitely a specialty. But in the end, there's still too many mysteries surrounding him, so he could be stronger than Kaido or weaker than Mihawk. But worst case scenario, he's still one of the strongest in the world. With that being said though, let's move on to the rest of the Red Hair Pirates, starting off with the Commanders. And when I say the Commanders, I'm of course referring to Ben Beckman, Lucky Roo, and Yasop. Now it's actually not official that these three are the Commanders, but they are the three that are most prominent. Let's start off by talking about Ben Beckman because I feel like he's almost as hyped up as Shanks. Now Ben Beckman we actually know even less about than Shanks, but we did get a lot of information from his Viver card, and that's where a lot of the hype is building up. Because in the Viver card, Oda really emphasizes Ben Beckman's role as the first mate and how much he understands Shanks. And the one thing that he said that a lot of people focused on is that he's actually quite comparable to Shanks. Now of course when you hear something like that, you're gonna latch onto that idea because it's super interesting. Like up until now, we met a lot of strong first mates, but there's always been like a clear separation between the captain and the first mate. So if Ben Beckman's actually comparable to Shanks in strength and is actually near Yonko level, that's a super dope idea, and I get why people are hype about it. At the same time though, I do think it's important to note that that quote was not specifically referring to power. So although it might have referred to power, it could have been something else like leadership, so just take that with a grain of salt. But another thing that really builds into the hype of Ben Beckman is what we've seen from him in the story. First off, just in chapter 1, even though he was fighting some mountain bandits, him stepping up as the first mate I think further emphasized his relationship with Shanks. But as far as power goes, the one thing everybody points to is the moment he had in Marineford, and that of course was when he points the gun at Kizaru and Kizaru immediately stops in his tracks. That was a super badass moment. I even remember the first time I watched it, I was ridiculously hyped. But I do think that moment gets taken out of context sometimes, and that some people believe that Kizaru is really scared. But if you actually look back at that moment, it almost feels like Kizaru is trolling, because Beckman points the gun at him to stop him from shooting at Lost Submarine, but literally just a little bit later, Kizaru shoots at the submarine anyways. So even though Beckman stopping him was a badass moment, it wasn't like Kizaru was genuinely scared. That being said, I do think Ben Beckman is gonna be one of the strongest first mates. I don't think he's gonna be that close to Shanks in power, but I would not be surprised if out of all the Yonko commanders, he's the strongest. But moving on, let's talk about the other two commanders with Yasop and Lucky Roo. Now once again, these two aren't really officially commanders. Technically they're officers, just like the other ones we'll talk about in a bit. But again, within the Red Hair Pirates, they have been the other two that have been the most prominent. Let's start by talking about Lucky Roo, who's one of my favorite characters, honestly. I love his design and how he's like a very fun, goofy character, but then when shit got real, he did not hesitate to shoot somebody in the skull. So I can't wait to see more of Lucky Roo. I think he has like the same contrasting personality as Shanks, but it's even like more extreme where like he parties more and he's even more ruthless. In his Viver card, we also found out that he's the combatant of the Red Hair Pirates, so I'm really excited to see how he fights. I have a feeling that he's actually going to be really fast and really strong. And then kind of to contrast him, we have Yasop, who's the sniper. And first off, I just want to say, this is why you gotta love the Red Hair Pirates. They have so much versatility. We have Shanks as the swordsman, Yasop as the sniper, Lucky Roo as just like a brawler. Ben Beckman feels like he could do a little bit of everything, and we haven't even met a single Devil Fruit user yet. But yeah, when it comes to Yasop, I do think he's gonna be one of the strongest officers of the Red Hair Pirates. He might be a little weaker than Lucky Roo and Ben Beckman just because he's only a sniper, but I think he's probably right up there with like Van Augur as like the best sniper in the world. And honestly, I'm just excited to see what some snipers actually do with guns and how they combat like Haki and Devil Fruits and stuff. But the question I think that's most interesting when it comes to Lucky Roo and Yasop is how they stack up to the other Yonko commanders. Because I think for a long time we really hyped them up to be like far and above the other Yonko commanders, because we always saw Shanks' crew as this small crew, so they had to kind of make up for it with just like strong individuals. Also, you had that moment where Ben Beckman, Yasop, and Lucky Roo were specifically pointed out to be very strong. But now that we've found out about the other crew members at Marineford being officers, my personal theory is that every single one of them are like Yonko commander level. So the strength of the Red Hair Pirates doesn't only rely on the top 4, but instead it's like the top 8. So for Lucky Roo and Yasop, I don't think they have to be stronger than like Katakuri and King. Instead, what I think is that all of the red-haired officers are stronger than like Jack. So with that said, let's talk about these officers officers that were recently revealed. The names of these officers are Howling Gab, Lime Juice, Building Snake, Hongo, and Bonk Punch. Such classic One Piece names, I love it. But yeah, once again, I think the strength of these guys are what really elevates the red hair pirates. They're probably still a step below Yasop and Lucky Roo, but I see them as a big step ahead of like your Peril Sparrows and Snags, and even Cracker, to be honest. Maybe even Smoothie, she hasn't done anything yet. Another thing I found interesting is that if you add in Shanks, Ben Beckman, the officers, along with Rockstar and the monkey named Monster, it gives you a total of 11, which is not only the number of Titanic captains plus Blackbeard, but also the current number of Straw Hats plus one more. And I will gladly take this chance to push Yamato over Straw Hat. But yeah, with that said, let's go through some of these officers and talk about what potential powers they might have. Howling Gab might be the most interesting one to me because he kind of looks like animalistic. We haven't gotten any hints of devil fruits within the red hair pirates. I don't see any reason why Shanks would discriminate, so maybe Howling Gab has like a zone of some sort. His name kind of plays into that as well. Then you have Building Snake and Bonk Punch, who feel like the two diesel brawlers of the crew. Building Snake is definitely in the running for biggest neck in One Piece. Now what's also interesting with these officers is that we do have early images of them, and some of them are using different weapons, but I don't know how much to rely on that. Like Building Snake was using a sword at one point and Bonk Punch had a gun, but neither of them had that when they showed up to Marineford, so I feel like they might just be brawlers at this point. Besides them, we also have Hongo and Lime Juice, and these two are interesting because they actually brought weapons to Marineford. Now in their early pictures, Hongo was using a sword and Lime Juice was using an axe, but I expect these two to be like the specific weapon users of the red hair pirates. I think it would make sense for there to be another swordsman on the red hair pirates, with Shanks being a swordsman, and there could be like a backstory of them dueling before and Shanks winning and inviting them. But yeah, overall, getting the names of these officers is really exciting. I'm really intrigued to see what specific fighting styles they have. Besides them, the other two people we know are Rockstar and the monkey Monster. Now Rockstar is one of the newer members. He joined pre-time skip and had a bounty of 94 million. Oda did point out in the recent SBS that he is quite strong as well. And then Monster the monkey, I can't really tell if he's gonna be strong or not. Some people have speculated that he's related to the monkeys on the island that Mihawk is from, so he could actually be strong, but maybe he just turns out to be a fun pet as well. During Marineford, he was hanging around Bonk Punch, so maybe those two are like a pair, but who knows, maybe he ends up being Chopper's matchup in a Davy back fight. The direction game was really fun last time. Let's play again. You have to pick up, down, left, or right, and if you lose, you have to like, subscribe, and watch this video. 3, 2, 1, keep your head up.